Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Irin Carmon. I'm a senior correspondent at New York Magazine. Thrilled to be here to talk about will women stop Trump? Will abortion activate enough voters to stop Trump again? With me now is Rebecca Traister, Moji Aliwode-El. Did I say that right?
Perfect.
Okay. And Joan Walsh, who need no introduction. Since we have such a short period of time to talk about something so consequential, I want to start out by quoting the man of the day, Trump. In a rare moment of honesty, before the 2016 election, he said, "The answer is there must be some form of punishment." He was talking about what was then seen as a very hypothetical abortion ban, and what would the penalty be for people seeking abortions. Obviously, he walked that back very quickly, but I've always thought it was amazing that he kind of naively or unthinkingly said what we all knew was coming down the line. Now, more recently, in the last few weeks, Trump has backed off from the very legacy that he can rightfully claim before the right, which is the overturning of Roe v. Wade. He's not wanted to talk about it. He's not wanted to answer any questions about a 15-week ban. He said, we'll come up with some kind of number that everybody will be happy with. Cool. So I guess I want to start out by asking you, in your wisdom, what has changed between the Trump who at the 2016 presidential debates talked about ripping live babies from their mothers' wombs to the Trump who wants to change the subject from abortion completely? Who wants to jump in?
I think losing the 2020 election is part of it, but then also we see whenever abortion comes up for election, abortion wins. And I think that more than anything, he wants to win.
And I would amplify that. He said everything he said about abortion in 2016, in 2020, and now is just about him trying to maneuver how to get power, right? He didn't have any particular investment in being anti-abortion when he ran in 2016, but he knew he needed the support of an anti-abortion right in order, and he got it, and that narrow win in 2016 is in part because he signed away his soul to the Susan B. Anthony Foundation, Association. But that wasn't born of any inherent ideological commitment to this issue. He wants to be president. But also, the thing that changed between then and now is the Dobbs decision, and the court, he did it. The right that he needed to persuade did it after years that had nothing to do with Donald Trump, right. Years of building power, yep. And emphasizing this, while a lot of people, including a political press, and in many cases a Democratic Party, pretended it wasn't real over decades. Trump happened to be the person who said the words to get the power, to get the job, to close the deal.
Right, he was more explicit than anyone has ever been. He has said it will automatically happen, turned out he was right, when I appoint pro-life justices, yep. They will overturn Roe. Joan, you look like you were ready to say something.
Well, a couple things. He doesn't believe anything, you guys.
Exactly.
So, whatever he needs to say in the moment. But, going back to 2016, I truly believe if there was one moment that made him president, it was when he stood up and released that list of Leonard Leo approved anti-choice judges and said, this is my list. I will pick from this list. And we didn't know he would get 3. But he did. And so he still goes around and says, I did it. I gave you, I did Dobbs. I got rid of Roe. He did do it. And so, I covered this and I was kind of fooled. But when he refused to come out for a national ban, and he's sketchy, he's all over the place, the Susan B. Anthony folks blasted him. And then a week later, he had a nice meeting with them and Lindsey Graham and some other kiss ass, and they're like, oh, he is the most pro-life president in history
because they know he's going to win.
I think what it is,
at least the nomination.
I think what everyone's saying here is that he's slippery. He will say what he needs to get ahead, and so he's like, well, I've already proven something to the anti, so now I just have to get anyone moderate enough to listen to me to buy what I'm selling.
And I want to be clear, I was speaking from a position of feigned naivete.
Obviously.
I just want the record to show that I do not believe a word he says. However, I do think that he is a savvy barometer. he's a savvy reflector of where the political winds are blowing. And so I wonder if you could help me think about what was the political conventional wisdom before Dobbs was overturned, and what do we understand now about the role that abortion is playing in campaigns now and moving forward?
The conventional wisdom for anyone who was not paying attention, which was most people, is that Roe was the lay of the land, and Roe is not going anywhere. And if you take that as a fact, then you can vote thinking of literally anything else. You can say, oh, well, I'm for, big business. I'm for these other things. Like, if you believe that Roe is set, then you're fine. What we know now is Roe's gone. We have no Roe. We had the Dobbs decision. We are stuck in the aftermath. And so he has to change his words.
Go ahead.
Jump in.
Yeah, I want to say, and I know this conference is about Trump, but we really have to look at what is true in the Republican Party and has been true for so long that people refused to acknowledge. So, and that is a question of the press and Democratic opponents of these Republican candidates who laid the groundwork to get the court that we have that gave us Dobbs and so many other decisions, including those still to come, including potentially on contraception, on marriage equality, right? The litany that Clarence Thomas offered in his concurrence, right? That's the court we have now and for a very long time ahead of us. But again, the question of what is this guy going to do if he's the president and the head of a Republican Party where the base is still avid about this. There is post-Dobbs. Both parties are the dogs that caught the bus here, right? The Republicans got what they've been fighting for when it comes to abortion for decades, and now they're seeing how unpopular it's been in state elections where Democrats have fought savvily about it, and that's a separate part of the discussion, is how do you have this electoral fight? And we've seen it on state levels in both political, elections for governor and for Senate, and on state ballot initiatives. We have seen just whomping victories. And now better understand.
Even in red states.
Even in red
states, which those who
even with red candidates winning.
Right,
Abortion
the preliminary
wins.
Question in Ohio, in Kentucky, in Kansas, Montana.
And so that's the reality. Like, that's why you see people, including Donald Trump, trying to figure out on the right, backing
Even
off.
Donald Trump has to acknowledge how powerful this can be.
But you also have a party that is filled with diehards on this subject, right? There used to be a sort of canny distance on the part of a lot of people that was sort of Trumpian, and I believe McConnell, your older generation of Republicans who were not diehards on this, not, before Roe and even after, it was often Republicans who were fighting for abortion rights just as hard as Democrats, and that's really true even after Roe, and that had changed over the past few decades. And you now have a party that is guided by real true believer diehards, and if Trump wins the nomination and wins the presidency, he's serving at the behest of that party.
Also, I think this, especially I was reading an article today about what's happening in Ohio. They have this ballot initiative, and both sides are fighting really hard, and obviously if the issue wins, abortion rights and reproductive rights will be enshrined in Ohio until someone comes around and fights it. But the antis are just lying. They're saying, oh, this will just return the conversation back. But it's like at the Supreme Court right now in Ohio, there's a 6-week ban that they're talking about.
Right.
So if this fails, there will be a 6-week ban in Ohio. And I feel like also what we're hearing from Trump is he's saying what he needs to get elected.
Right.
And when he gets elected, then the full abortion ban is probably very much on the table.
And I just want to step back because I think this is implied in what everyone is saying, but just to kind of spell it out, the theoretical is behind us. What we have now is a reality in which the reality of abortion bans in at least 14 states is being felt. And every single day, people are reading the stories of the cruelty, the deprivation. Just today, a story of a woman forced to bear non-viable twins in Texas.
I read that.
Torture stories every single day.
Every day.
And so even Trump is feeling like he has to lie about this in this direction because he thinks he's already running in a general election, which is safe to say he probably is. But I'm wondering, Joan, how well do you think the Democrats are framing this issue as we move forward? Are they coasting on these, referenda? Are they robustly defending abortion to the extent that you think would be politically and morally savvy?
I mean, it obviously varies from Democrat to Democrat, but you know, you look at somebody like Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, and she's such a hero. And Michigan has undergone an incredible political transformation led by women. She places abortion as well as gun control. There's this group of issues that where the American people believe strongly in the right thing, like protecting abortion rights, like more restrictions on guns. They like democracy too, as it happens, and these things are no longer popular with Republicans. So you have very talented people. I happen to like our vice president. I think she's out there. She's doing a good job. They finally gave her, an agenda that I think she can run with and run with well. I think, I have covered from the very beginning of the Trump resistance, which was so often mocked as like wine moms, suburban wine moms, and whiny Hillary supporters, get over it. But that has powered the democracy movement in this country. There's no doubt. Black women, first and foremost, always. But there has been this genuine radicalization to some extent that started in Virginia in some ways. A bunch of women ran for the state assembly and like 11 of them won. They almost took it back from the Republicans. They did the next time. Rebecca and I were in Georgia covering young John Ossoff's race. Nobody ever heard of him, but he happens to be a senator now. And we were blown away by these women. Some were ex-Republicans, some were Bernie people, and some were Hillary people, who had just been radicalized by Trump and radicalized on the issue of abortion. And now you can't call Georgia a blue state. It's still very purple. It's tenuous, but it's powered by women, multiracial movement of women enraged about this issue. Virginia right now, Virginians lost the governorship. They insisted on nominating my good friend Terry McAuliffe to be the Democratic nominee, and he was beaten by the guy in the fleece vest, Glenn Youngkin, who has been very cagey about abortion, but is now telegraphing that he will sign at the very least a 15-week ban if he gets the support of the legislature. This is galvanizing campaigns in Virginia that I thought were, if not dead, dying. There was just not, 2 months ago, there was really not much energy in Virginia, and now I'm getting calls from campaign managers and consultants and candidates themselves, and I really don't want to travel, but I'm gonna go down to Virginia because something big is happening, and it's also a test of whether Youngkin becomes our next Republican star. It's powerful.
Rebecca, you're vibrating over here. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to go, what Joan said about how Democrats are running on this, varying from candidate to candidate. I wrote a really long feature on how the Democratic Party was handling this on sort of state and federal levels earlier this year. And it's fascinating because, like in so much in American politics right now, you have a real generational divide. And because there was a generation of Democrats. Remember, there's no template for how to do this because leading up to the Roe decision in 1973, you were just beginning to get the fights, the actual political electoral fights over legalization. And you had states like, where Ronald Reagan again signed the most liberal abortion law at that point in 1967 in California as governor. You had New York and Washington State. You had a couple of states that had legalized abortion. But then with the Supreme Court decision, it was taken off the table electorally. And so there's no actual template in place for how do you have this fight when you're talking about, I'm running for governor or I'm running for city councilor. How does that have to do with abortion, right? And you have a generation of Democrats who lived in a world where bad polling told them that abortion was an electric issue they couldn't touch over decades. Yeah. There was a way and this is important.
One in which they were always at a disadvantage. Not just that they couldn't touch it, but that they were always on the defense.
Always on the defense. Yes. And you also had a party, and both parties for a long time, that were run by a lot of white men who did not have any comfort or facility talking about reproductive health care.
We still have them.
Yeah,
we still have them.
I know. And so you have a generation that literally doesn't know how to do this easily. And they're still, by and large, in control of the Democratic Party. Then you have politicians who I think, and Joan brought up Whitmer, one of the fascinating things about how Whitmer's doing it, and I spent time reporting on her again in February, she does have an ease of talking about it. One of the challenges is don't be defensive, talk about it in real terms, like lived terms, say the word abortion, but it's also not about siloing it out as a separate issue. It is the connection between abortion protections, gay and lesbian and trans protections, democracy protection. In Whitmer's case, she talks about abortion as part of a pro-business agenda that is, it's using the terms that were taken by the anti-abortion right, like family, faith, pro-life, life, family values, all that stuff is on the side of abortion rights. But you need a group of politicians who are going to be able to take that language. And I think that there are young politicians who are doing it.
Most are not. I
Most
think a lot are not.
Right,
I feel like a lot of times it's sort of like I feel like there's a tepid putting your foot in the water that we're seeing from Democrats saying, oh, this works.
Yes.
Oh, let's try this. But I feel like a wholehearted embrace, a full-throated, like this is what will win us elections, tying things together, saying that what we're talking about are human rights. Right. Is something that we're not seeing wholesale writ large in the Democratic Party.
Because you have a layer of leadership that just was, this was anathema to them. It's like it couldn't be more distant from how they understood how to talk. And it's their, and consultants, a consultant class that has no facility or fluency with these issues. That are like, don't, it's dangerous, it's very dangerous.
I wonder if we could spend our last few minutes thinking about the different scenarios of the election. What would happen? What would particularly be at stake if Donald Trump becomes president again? Well, obviously, Congress TBD. But you know, these are not just kind of war games. There are real people's lives that are being affected by this. And I'm wondering how you see this playing out, given the political backlash being even more that they. And to be clear, they were originally, the Supreme Court was going to rule on a 15-week ban, and they went for everything. So it is, there's a reason that Republicans are not quite prepared, even now, because they got everything they wanted a lot faster than they wanted to. So what would Trump do, in your view? What would it cost? And if there were another Joe Biden term, with perhaps a trifecta, what could you look forward to? What could people who support abortion rights and reproductive freedom look forward to?
If there were a Joe Biden term, if there were a Democratic president, President, House, and Senate, I would expect the passage of a reproductive health act in some form.
I would hope.
Yeah, me too. I'm being optimistic.
I love your optimism.
I'm being optimistic, and I want it for anybody who responds to that by saying, "Oh yeah, but the court will overturn it." You bet, and that's actually a fight we need to have. And don't let anybody telling you that our courts are lost means that we shouldn't be passing the crucial federal legislation. And in fact, we also have to have a fight about that court, and if it's going to, so if passing this kind of crucial human rights protection, and there are, there are
and
lots
voting
of them
and voting rights. I mean, all these things.
Then hit us up against a question about what do we do about the Supreme Court, which needs to be done. Then more power to everybody having that conversation. And then on the other side, if you have a Trump presidency or any Republican presidency and they have a trifecta, I think you also have to think about how easily they will move to, oh, it's a compromise.
Right.
A 12-week ban, a 15-week ban,
a 6-week ban.
A 6-week ban. Oh, it's a compromise. You can still get your abortions before 6 weeks or 12 weeks or 15 weeks, all of which are horrific outcomes. And
we'll have some exceptions for maybe rape, maybe the life of the mother, as long as you report the rape immediately.
Which we know are meaningless lies.
And I think something that always gets lost about these 12 and 15-week federal bans is that they're aimed at places like New York. They're not going to restore abortion in Alabama up to 12 weeks.
Right.
It's going to be full bans in about half the country, and limiting the democratic will of voters of California, New York, Colorado, New Mexico, who have much broader protections, taking that away.
Also, I think we started this panel by, all establishing, Trump has no morals, so it's hard to guess what he will do, because he'll do whatever he owes the election to, asked him to do. I think that's what we saw when he was president, and I think that's what we'll see if he gets or any Republican, but especially him.
What would you like to see a second Joe Biden term bring?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I would love to see a reproductive health act. I'd love to see abortion access restored throughout the country. I would like to not see people bleeding out in parking lots in Texas. I would like that to stop.
Right.
Yeah, so sad that has to be an applause line.
You know, you mentioned, I also read that story about the woman who was forced to carry these poor twins who died immediately to term. And sometimes I'm ambivalent about how much we emphasize the people who wanted to be pregnant and really would have done anything to keep their babies, but they had some tragedy. Except the reason I'm okay with it, not to the exclusion of other stories, but abortion is healthcare. It's healthcare. Mm-hmm. And it was so stigmatized and siloed off, and now you are having, this young woman who, her twins died. It sounds like she was not too political, and her mother-in-law was a Trumper. And so you have these people now who are like, oh my God, well, I did everything right, and now I have this horrible thing happen, and I can't get the help I need. And so I do think that there's going to be a continual, I hate to say it because there's so much suffering, but I do think that there's a frickin' education in the way our bodies work. Basically.
Joan, I was actually just having this conversation. I have a child, and I was like talking to another parent. I was like, they don't tell you shit about like your body, even when you're pregnant. And so I think part of it is also no one understands how any of this works.
Well, I just want to say,
she's looking at me because I'm writing a book about pregnancy called Unbearable.
Yeah, I mean, Irin wrote this amazing first-person piece about everything you go through. Even in a normal pregnancy, the people are like, oh my God, my hips are expanding and I'm incontinent.
My husband actually was like, I can't keep reading this. It's like a horror movie.
It's a horror movie.
And he went through 2 pregnancies with me. So we think we've all done it. And yeah, it's definitely something that should never be forced on anybody. But you're right. I mean, I think what's important, there has been an education in the past 14 months, which is that people always thought that the abortion was someone else, some other thing, not something I would need, not something someone I love would need. And that's a form of gaslighting that was allowed to prevail.
By Democrats as well.
Yes.
The gaslighting that said this would never happen, the Supreme Court will never overturn Roe v. Wade. We also have that moment of truth right now where we all knew, people on this stage obviously believed that it was going to happen, but we were told many times by supposedly wise men that they would never do it because it would hurt the Republicans too much.
To our faces, mocking us and calling us hysterical.
As we were protesting.
So in our last 40 seconds, it gives us no pleasure to say I told you so, but this is a moment of truth and a moment of power and mobilization, and I want to thank these wonderful panelists for talking it over with us.
Thank you. It's an honor.